Dr. Sarah Chen had always prided herself on being a rational woman. As a forensic psychologist, she dealt with the darkest corners of human nature daily, dissecting the minds of killers and understanding the psychology behind their heinous acts. So when she received the call about the Blackwood House investigation, she approached it with her usual scientific skepticism. The local police department had requested her expertise after 3 previous investigators had abandoned the case, citing disturbing psychological effects and refusing to elaborate further. Sarah saw it as nothing more than suggestion and mass hysteria, a textbook case of how fear could infect supposedly rational minds. The Blackwood House stood on the outskirts of Millbrook, a small town nestled in the fog-shrouded hills of Northern California. Built in 1847 by railroad magnate Cornelius Blackwood, the Victorian mansion had been the site of numerous unexplained deaths over the past century and a half. The most recent incident involved the Hartley family, parents Michael and Lisa, along with their twin daughters Emma and Sophie, aged 7. They had been found dead in their beds exactly 1 month ago, with no signs of violence, poisoning, or any discernible cause of death. The coroner had ruled it sudden cardiac arrest for all 4 victims, but the simultaneity of their deaths had raised questions that the local authorities couldn't answer. Sarah's rental car crunched over the gravel driveway as she approached the imposing structure. Even in the pale afternoon light, the house seemed to absorb shadows, its Gothic architecture creating an almost organic sense of menace. The wraparound porch sagged under the weight of rotting wooden beams, and several windows on the upper floors were boarded up with weathered plywood. Paint peeled from the exterior walls in long, curling strips that reminded Sarah uncomfortably of dead skin. The front door was answered by Detective Ray Morrison, a heavy-set man in his 50s whose weathered face spoke of decades spent dealing with humanity's worst impulses. He led Sarah through the foyer, where a grand staircase curved upward into darkness, its banister carved with intricate patterns that seemed to shift and writhe in her peripheral vision. The Hartleys were the 4th family to die in this house since 2018, Morrison explained as they walked through rooms draped in dust covers. Before that, it sat empty for nearly 20 years after the previous owners, the Kowalskis, were found dead under similar circumstances. No signs of struggle, no obvious cause of death, just gone. Sarah took notes methodically, her pen scratching against the paper as she documented the layout of each room. The house felt wrong somehow, though she couldn't articulate exactly why. The proportions seemed slightly off, as if the architect had been working from fever dreams rather than blueprints. Corridors that should have led to logical destinations instead opened onto dead ends or rooms that served no apparent purpose. The air itself felt thick and oppressive, carrying an underlying scent that reminded her of copper pennies and something else she couldn't quite identify. They climbed to the 2nd floor, where the Hartley family had met their end. The master bedroom still contained the king-sized bed where Michael and Lisa had been found, while the adjoining room had housed the twins' bunk beds. Sarah examined each space carefully, taking photographs and measurements, searching for any detail that previous investigators might have missed. The strange thing, Morrison continued, is that all the victims were found with peaceful expressions, no signs of distress, no indication they even knew what was happening to them. It's like they just decided to stop living. As Sarah worked, she began to notice an odd acoustic phenomenon. Sounds seemed to echo strangely throughout the house, creating a constant background whisper that made it difficult to concentrate. She mentioned this to Morrison, who nodded grimly. That's why they call it the echoing house. Some say it's just the way the architecture channels sound, but others claim it's something else entirely. The previous investigators all reported hearing voices, conversations, arguments, crying children, but whenever they tried to locate the source, they found empty rooms. Sarah spent the remainder of the afternoon conducting a thorough examination of the property. She documented everything methodically, the strange cold spots that seemed to have no logical explanation, the way certain rooms felt oppressively claustrophobic while others seemed to stretch beyond their actual dimensions, and the persistent sense that she was being watched by unseen eyes. That evening, she checked into the Millbrook Inn, the town's only hotel. The desk clerk, a nervous young man named Tommy, couldn't hide his surprise when she mentioned her destination. "You're investigating the Blackwood House?" he asked, his voice dropping to a whisper. "My grandmother used to clean for the Kowalskis before they died. She always said that house was hungry, that it fed on something human beings possessed, something essential." Sarah dismissed such talk as local folklore, but she found herself unable to shake the feeling that something was fundamentally wrong with the entire situation. That night, she lay in her hotel bed reviewing her notes and photographs, searching for patterns that might explain the mysterious deaths. The images she had taken seemed different somehow, as if the camera had captured details that her eyes had missed. In several shots, there appeared to be shadowy figures in the background, distortions that could be explained by poor lighting or camera artifacts, yet seemed almost deliberately placed. She returned to the house the following morning, this time bringing additional equipment, electromagnetic field detectors, digital thermometers, and high-sensitivity audio recording devices. If there were rational explanations for the phenomena reported by previous investigators, she was determined to find them. The moment she entered the house, Sarah felt the change. The oppressive atmosphere seemed more intense, as if her presence the previous day had somehow awakened something that had been dormant. The whispers were more pronounced now, creating an almost musical backdrop that seemed to emanate from the walls themselves. She set up her recording equipment in the main hallway and began a systematic investigation of each room. In the dining room, her EMF detector registered massive fluctuations that defied explanation. The readings spiked and dropped in patterns that seemed almost rhythmic, like a heartbeat or breathing. The temperature sensors recorded similar anomalies, sudden drops of 10 or 15 degrees in specific locations that seemed to move throughout the room as she watched. As Sarah worked, she began to experience what she initially dismissed as psychological suggestion. She caught glimpses of movement in her peripheral vision, shadows that seemed to have depth and substance. The whispers grew more distinct, resolving into what sounded like fragments of conversation. She could make out individual words: hungry, feed, forever, join us. By mid-afternoon, she had documented numerous anomalies that challenged her scientific worldview. The house seemed to be alive in some fundamental way, responding to her presence and reacting to her investigations. The recorded audio contained voices that hadn't been audible during the actual recording, conversations in languages she couldn't identify, and underlying subsonic frequencies that made her feel physically nauseous when she played them back. It was in the basement that Sarah made her first truly disturbing discovery. Behind a false wall that she located using her EMF detector, she found a hidden room that contained what appeared to be a shrine. The walls were covered with photographs, hundreds of them dating back to the house's earliest days. They showed every family that had ever lived in the Blackwood house, from Cornelius Blackwood himself to the recently deceased Hartleys. But these weren't normal family photographs. In each image, the subjects appeared to be asleep or unconscious, their faces bearing the same peaceful expression that Morrison had described finding on the recent victims. At the center of the shrine sat an ornate wooden box, carved with symbols that seemed to hurt her eyes when she looked at them directly. Despite every instinct screaming at her not to touch it, Sarah felt compelled to open the container. Inside, she found a collection of what appeared to be preserved human organs, hearts, to be specific. Each was labeled with a name and date, creating a chronological record of the house's victims stretching back over 150 years. The revelation hit her like a physical blow. The house wasn't just the site of mysterious deaths, it was the cause of them. Something within these walls was systematically harvesting human lives, collecting them like trophies. The peaceful expressions on the victims' faces suggested they had died willingly, perhaps even eagerly, as if they had been convinced that death was preferable to whatever alternative they faced. Sarah's hands shook as she photographed the shrine and its contents. Her scientific mind struggled to process what she was seeing, searching for rational explanations that simply didn't exist. The evidence was undeniable. The Blackwood house was somehow alive, possessed of a malevolent intelligence that fed on human life force. As she worked to document her findings, Sarah became aware that the whispers around her were growing louder and more insistent. The voices seemed to be coming from the preserved hearts themselves, each one adding to a growing chorus that filled the basement with an otherworldly symphony. She could make out individual pleas now: join us, stay with us, become part of us, feed the house. The temperature in the basement began to drop rapidly, and Sarah watched in horror as her breath began to mist in the suddenly frigid air. The EMF detector in her hand began to emit a high-pitched whine as its readings went completely off the scale. The walls themselves seemed to pulse with a rhythm that matched her own heartbeat, as if the house was synchronizing itself with her biological functions. Sarah tried to leave the basement but found that the door through which she had entered was no longer there. The wall appeared solid and unbroken, as if the entrance had never existed. Panic began to set in as she realized she was trapped in the hidden room with its macabre collection of human remains. The whispers were becoming more aggressive now, no longer pleading, but demanding. The voices spoke in unison, creating a sound that seemed to bypass her ears and resonate directly in her bones. You cannot leave. You belong to us now. Feed the house. Join the collection. Give us your heart. Sarah's training as a psychologist kicked in, and she forced herself to analyze the situation rationally. What she was experiencing had to be some form of mass hallucination, possibly induced by environmental factors like infrasound or chemical emissions. The house might be contaminated with naturally occurring psychoactive compounds that could explain the reported phenomena and the mysterious deaths. But even as she tried to rationalize her experience, Sarah found herself drawn to the wooden box and its collection of preserved hearts. Each one seemed to pulse with its own inner light, creating a hypnotic display that made it difficult to look away. She could feel her own heart responding to their rhythm, syncing with the collective beat of the house's victims. Hours passed, though Sarah had lost all sense of time in the windowless basement room. Her equipment batteries died one by one, leaving her in near total darkness, broken only by the eerie glow emanating from the preserved organs. The whispers had evolved into a complex harmony that seemed to tell the story of the house itself. Through the collective voice of the dead, Sarah learned the truth about Cornelius Blackwood and his grand design. The railroad magnate hadn't just built a house. He had constructed a feeding mechanism, a spiritual trap designed to harvest human souls for some unspeakable purpose. The architectural anomalies, the acoustic properties, even the location itself had been carefully chosen to create optimal conditions for the house's dark hunger. Blackwood had been the first to feed the house, offering his own heart willingly to activate the mechanism he had created. Each subsequent death had made the house stronger, more capable of luring and capturing new victims. The families who lived there weren't random targets. They were carefully selected, drawn to the property by the house's growing influence over the local area. Sarah found herself walking toward the wooden box, her movements no longer entirely under her own control. The preserved hearts pulsed more rapidly as she approached, their light growing brighter with each step. She could feel her own life force being drawn toward them, pulled by an irresistible force that promised peace and belonging. The revelation came to her then, crystal clear in its horrible simplicity. She hadn't been called to investigate the Blackwood House deaths. She had been summoned as the next victim. Her reputation as a rational skeptic had made her the perfect candidate, someone whose scientific credibility could be used to legitimize the house's claims and draw in future victims. Every previous investigator who had fled the house had been allowed to leave because they weren't suitable for the collection. Their fear and panic made them unpalatable to whatever entity controlled the house. But Sarah's calm, analytical approach had marked her as ideal prey. The house had been preparing her since the moment she arrived, slowly wearing down her defenses and drawing her deeper into its web. As this understanding washed over her, Sarah felt the last of her resistance crumble. The whispers were right. Fighting was pointless. The house had existed for over a century, had claimed dozens of victims, and would continue to do so long after she was gone. She was just another link in an endless chain of death and consumption. The wooden box opened of its own accord as she reached for it, revealing an empty space perfectly sized for one more heart. Sarah understood what was expected of her, what had always been expected of her since the moment she received that first phone call. She felt a strange sense of relief as she accepted her fate, a peace that came from finally understanding her purpose. She could feel her heart slowing, its rhythm synchronizing with the collected organs around her. There was no pain, no fear, only a growing sense of belonging as she became part of something larger than herself. The house welcomed her warmly, embracing her as it had embraced all the others who had come before. Detective Morrison found Sarah's body 3 days later, when she failed to check out of her hotel. She was discovered in the master bedroom of the Blackwood House, lying peacefully on the same bed where the Hartley parents had died. Her face wore the same serene expression that had marked all the previous victims, and the coroner would later rule her death as sudden cardiac arrest with no apparent cause. Her investigation notes were found scattered throughout the house, but they told an incomplete story. The photographs she had taken showed only empty rooms and normal architectural features. Her audio recordings contained nothing but static and the occasional creak of settling wood. The hidden basement room that featured so prominently in her written descriptions was nowhere to be found, and no trace of the shrine or its contents could be located. The official report concluded that Dr. Sarah Chen had suffered a psychological breakdown brought on by the stress of investigating multiple unexplained deaths. Her detailed accounts of supernatural phenomena were dismissed as the products of a deteriorating mental state, and the case was closed without further investigation. But the Blackwood House remained, patient and hungry, waiting for the next family to discover its charms. The for sale sign that appeared on the front lawn a week after Sarah's death would eventually attract new owners, drawn by the property's historical significance and surprisingly reasonable price. They would move in with dreams of restoring the grand Victorian mansion to its former glory. unaware that its glory had always been built on human sacrifice. The whispers in the walls grew slightly louder with each new addition to the collection, and if you listened carefully on quiet nights, you could hear Dr. Sarah Chen's voice among them, warning future visitors to stay away. But the house had ways of making sure such warnings went unheeded, and the cycle would continue as it had for over a century and a half. In the basement, in a room that existed only when the house willed it, a new heart joined the collection in its ornate wooden box. It pulsed with the same rhythm as all the others, adding its voice to the eternal chorus that fed the Blackwood House's insatiable hunger. And somewhere in the darkness, something that had once been Cornelius Blackwood smiled with satisfaction, knowing that his creation would outlive them all, growing stronger with each soul it claimed until it had consumed the entire world. The house would wait, as it always had, patient and eternal, ready to welcome the next unsuspecting family who would mistake its hunger for hospitality. For the Blackwood House was never truly empty. It was full of the dead, and they were always eager for company in their endless servitude to the thing that had once been human, but was now something far more terrible and far more hungry than any mortal mind could comprehend.